The tactical operations center at the facility was quieter than usual, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled it just days ago. Sophia sat with Regin at her side, both watching as Gunnar leaned against the reinforced table, his cybernetic fingers tapping a slow rhythm. Eliana stood nearby, silent but present. Gunnar didn't waste time. The deal is set. Echo Division belongs to you now, Sophia. The pack is out. We'll remain allies, but the workshop and its personnel will answer to me, not to Homeland Security, not to Echo Division. Sophia nodded, her expression unreadable. And the elves? Eliana stepped forward. They remain where they are for now. Once the new facilities at the workshop are completed, they'll relocate. Until then, they operate independently within the facility, coordinating with Echo Division when necessary. And the supply chain? Regin asked, arms crossed. You'll have what you need, Gunnar said simply. Weapons, ammo, enchanted gear, we'll keep the production going, but don't expect a blank check. We're running operations, not charity. Sophia exhaled. And what about the land? It's mine, Gunnar said flatly. You get the facility, we get the expansion. The engineers are coming in to clear it, and we'll use the Base X for temporary operations. Once the construction is done, the pack and the elves will fully transition there. Sophia studied him for a moment. It's done, then. Almost, Gunnar said. We have one more thing to handle before it's official. Tomorrow morning, you and Regin are meeting the Alfheim High Council. They need to see exactly who they're working with. That got a reaction. Regin straightened slightly. The elves are that involved? Eliana's expression remained calm. You're stepping into a war that affects more than just Earth. The Council needs to recognize your leadership if this alliance is going to hold. Sophia exhaled, rubbing her temples. Fine, we'll be there. What do we need to know? Gunnar pushed away from the table. I'll handle the politics. You two just have to show up and not piss them off. Sophia snorted. No promises. Regin smirked. I like a challenge. Eliana nodded. Good. Then we leave at dawn. The room fell into silence for a moment. Then Sophia stood, extending her hand to Gunnar. Looks like we're in this for the long haul. Gunnar clasped it briefly, his grip firm. Let's just try not to get each other killed. The deal was done. Tomorrow, the real battle for the future of Echo Division would begin. As the meeting concluded, Gunnar turned to Eliana, a rare flicker of amusement in his one good eye. He tilted his head toward the door. You ready for the ride back, or should I have someone fetch you a horse? Eliana scoffed, smoothing down the loose strands of silver hair that had come undone during the wild drive to the facility. I don't know how you humans have survived this long without teleportation. Where's the fun in that? Gunnar said, guiding her toward the exit. They stepped out into the cool night air, the facility's floodlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The Wolfmobile sat waiting, its exposed framework still coated in dust from the battlefield. A machine built for war, not comfort. Eliana sighed dramatically, muttering something in Elvish about reckless humans before stepping up to the passenger side. Gunnar climbed behind the wheel, tapping the dashboard. Buckle up, Guardian. Round 2. As the engine roared to life, Eliana braced herself, clutching the side rail as Gunnar tore away from the facility, kicking up a cloud of dust behind them. She wasn't sure what was more dangerous, the war they were preparing for, or Gunnar's driving. Gunnar gripped the wheel with practiced ease, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as he veered off the main trail onto a narrower path. The Wolfmobile's tires dug into the dirt, kicking up a thick plume of dust behind them. Eliana clutched the side rail tighter, her usual composure slipping as the vehicle hit a sharp incline. Gunnar, she warned, but it was too late. The Wolfmobile launched into the air, the front end lifting as they cleared a small ridge. For a moment, everything hung suspended. The weightlessness of flight, the world catching its breath before gravity took hold. Then, thud! The vehicle hit the ground hard, bouncing once before Gunnar expertly corrected, tearing back onto the dirt road without hesitation. Eliana let out an exasperated breath, eyes flashing with frustration and, beneath it, adrenaline. That was unnecessary. Gunnar grinned, barely sparing her a glance. You lived! She muttered something sharp in Elvish, straightening in her seat as they finally approached the workshop. By the time they pulled into the garage, the usual suspects were gathered near the workbenches. Darren, Caleb, Eli, and Aletharis stood around the disassembled minigun, deep in conversation. The moment Gunnar threw the Wolfmobile into park, Eliana practically launched herself out of the passenger seat, her silver hair completely dishevelled from the wild ride. She smoothed it down hastily, straightening her robes in a desperate attempt to regain her usual elegance. Darren took one look at her, then at Gunnar, then at the Wolfmobile, and burst out laughing. Oh, damn, Keebler, you good? You look like you lost a fight with the wind. Eliana shot him a glare that could have frozen fire, but she was too busy pulling herself back together to reply. Gunnar, completely unfazed, strode past the group and jerked his chin toward the workbench. Build another one. Darren blinked. Another Wolfmobile? Yeah. Gunnar didn't break stride. And call the guy. Get the MK-19 for it. Darren's face lit up like Christmas. Wait, are you serious? You're actually letting me... Gunnar walked past him without slowing down. You're still standing here, so clearly you haven't called yet. Darren grabbed his radio, already barking orders. Eli just sighed, rubbing her temples. Gunnar just smirked, grabbing a water bottle off the nearby table and taking a long swig. Yeah, but I get results. Gunnar sat behind his makeshift desk, a sturdy fold-up table that still bore the weight of battle reports, maps, and scattered ammunition manifests. The room was dim, lit only by the low glow of his desk lamp and the ever-present hum of tension that seemed to cling to the walls. He rubbed a hand down his face, exhaustion pressing heavy against his shoulders. But there was no time for that. Not now. With a sigh, he keyed his radio. Rose, my office. Now? A long pause. Then her voice crackled back through the channel, full of its usual dry sarcasm. Miss me already? Just get here. Gunnar clicked off the radio before she could say anything else. Minutes later, the door swung open. Rose strode in like she owned the place, fire-kissed armour reflecting the dim light, her bullwhip coiled at her hip. She stopped a few feet from his table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. This better be good. Gunnar didn't waste time. He tapped a single finger on the table, a silent command to sit. Rose arched a brow. Not even a please. You're slipping, Gunnar. He gave her a flat look. Sit. She did, but with exaggerated ease, draping one arm over the back of the chair. All right, bossman. What's this about? Gunnar leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. You're going to Alfheim. At sunup. The smirk that had been playing at the corners of her lips vanished. She straightened slightly. You're serious? Eliana's arranged a portal. He watched her closely. It's time to get into Draven's network. You said you could do it if you had access. Well, now you do. Rose was quiet for a moment, processing. Then the smirk returned. And here I thought you'd never let me have any fun. Gunnar exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Just be ready. Oh, I'm always ready. She stood, flipping a strand of red hair over her shoulder before heading for the door. Then she paused, glancing back. You sure you trust me with this? Gunnar met her gaze evenly. I don't trust anyone, but I trust you'll get the job done. Rose tilted her head slightly, something flickering in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, she smirked again. Fair enough. See you at sunup. And with that, she was gone. Gunnar sat back in his chair, the hinges creaking under his weight as he exhaled a slow, steady breath. The war room was quiet now. Just him and the low hum of the monitors still running their endless scans. It had been a long week. Too many fights, too many losses. And tomorrow would be another battlefield, just a different kind. He grabbed his radio. Darren, Eli. Be ready at sunrise. We're going to the meeting. A pause. Then Darren's voice crackled back, full of its usual sarcasm. Oh, great. Another day, another party. Wear your Sunday best. Silence. Then, what the hell does that even mean? Eli's voice cut in next, her tone dry as ever. I think it means don't show up looking like a degenerate, Darren. Darren scoffed. I'm always presentable, it's my charm that's the problem. Gunnar shook his head, already regretting the conversation. Just be there, and don't make me regret this. Darren muttered something about no promises, and Eli simply responded with a clipped, understood. Gunnar clicked off the radio and leaned forward, rubbing his hands together. Tomorrow they'd be walking into a room filled with politics, power plays, and expectations. Gunnar didn't care much for any of it. But one thing was certain. He was walking in there with his people and they weren't taking orders from anyone. The air was crisp, a soft wind stirring through the trees as the early morning light filtered through the canopy. The group gathered near the portal entrance, tension thick despite the lack of immediate danger. This wasn't a battlefield, not in the traditional sense, but it carried the same weight. The fate of alliances, logistics, and the future of their operations depended on what happened next. Gunnar stood at the head of the group, his arms crossed as he surveyed the gathered team. He wasn't in his usual battle-worn gear, the faded, scuffed-up armor he always wore like a second skin. Instead, he was clad in a new set of reinforced tactical gear, clean, functional, fresh. Too fresh. It wasn't Gunnar's style, and it showed. Darren noticed immediately. He let out a low whistle, tilting his head. Damn, boss, I didn't know you had a Sunday best. Gunnar barely spared him a glance. Shut up, Darren. Darren grinned but straightened his uniform. He had traded his usual relaxed appearance for his army dress blues, the crisp fabric tailored to perfection. If he was going to be negotiating between Homeland Security, Echo Division, and Alfheim, he figured he might as well look the part. Still, he wasn't about to let Gunnar off the hook that easily. You clean up real nice, almost didn't recognize you, he added, smirking. I will turn this meeting into your funeral, Gunnar shot back dryly. Darren held up his hands in mock surrender. Then, Eli stepped forward, and Darren immediately lost his train of thought. She was wearing elven ceremonial robes, the intricate fabric draping over her form, embroidered in fine silver thread with ancient runes woven into the sleeves and collar. Her usual tech-enhanced gear was nowhere in sight, replaced by something that looked far more regal, far more refined. The shimmering silver and deep violet hues suited her, lending an air of mysticism that made her look every bit the elven technomancer she was. Darren blinked, then blinked again. What the hell? He said flatly, openly staring. Keebler, is that you under there? Eli lifted a perfectly arched brow, expression cool. Careful, Darren. I could enchant your uniform to make it tighter. Want to walk into this meeting looking like you stuffed yourself into a sausage casing? Darren cleared his throat and quickly moved on. Right. No need for that. Moving along. Clora approached next, wearing her elven ceremonial armor, polished to a near-mirror sheen. Her lieutenant rank insignia gleamed under the portal's soft glow, her commendations carefully arranged along her chest plate. She had earned every single one of them, and they were displayed with quiet pride. Omega padded at her side, his sleek fur reflecting the morning light. The young dire wolf had grown stronger since the battle, but there was still a restless energy to him, his sharp eyes scanning their surroundings, ever watchful. Gunnar met Clora's gaze, noting the rigid set of her shoulders. She was still carrying the weight of the merge, still adjusting to what it meant to fight like that, to become something more, something primal. You ready for this? He asked quietly. Clora nodded once. Always. There was an edge to her voice, something still simmering beneath the surface, but Gunnar let it be. They'd have a conversation later. Altheris arrived last, his movements composed, Precise. As Alfheim's lead artisan, he carried himself with the grace of someone who had spent centuries honing his craft. His robes were lined with runic embroidery, and he carried a small, ornate case, likely something for the meeting. "It is good to see you all prepared," he remarked smoothly, his piercing gaze sweeping over the assembled group. "Let us proceed. The High Council does not enjoy being kept waiting." The portal flickered with energy, the air humming with the magic that connected their world to Alfheim. Gunnar rolled his shoulders. Time to get this over with. He stepped forward, leading the way. Darren muttered behind him, "Great, more elves." Eli smirked. "Try not to embarrass us." Darren huffed, "No promises." Then, with a final glance toward one another, they stepped through the portal, vanishing into the shimmering light. As the shimmering light of the portal faded, Gunnar stepped out onto the Alfheim side, his boots crunching against the smooth, polished stone of the portal chamber. The air was crisp, carrying the distinct scent of ancient forests and charged magic, a stark contrast to the earthy, industrial scent of home. Waiting for them just beyond the portal's boundary was Aeliana, Sophia, and Regin. Aeliana stood with her usual composed grace, but there was something different about her today, a quiet intensity behind her gaze. She had arranged this meeting, had put her own name and influence on the line to make it happen. The High Council didn't simply grant audiences on a whim. This was a move that could change everything. Sophia, standing beside her, looked every bit the battle-tested operative she was. Clad in a black tactical uniform, she had the air of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and wasn't about to be intimidated by a bunch of elves, no matter how ancient and powerful they were. And then there was Regin. She stood tall in her army service uniform, her rank of colonel gleaming under the ethereal Alfheim light. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable, but her eyes took in everything: the architecture, the people, the subtle tension in the air. Regin had spent her entire career navigating military politics, leading troops in battle and making the tough calls. But this was different. She was about to walk into a room full of immortal beings who had been playing the long game for millennia. Even she knew she was out of her depth. Aeliana took a step forward, addressing them all. "We are expected. Follow me." She turned smoothly, leading them down the long, ornate corridors of the High Council's domain. The architecture was breathtaking. Tall, curved structures of silver-veined stone, intricate magical runes glowing softly along the walls. The very air vibrated with power, ancient and unyielding. Darren, walking just behind Gunnar, let out a low whistle. "All right, I'll admit it. Place is fancy." Eli shot him a warning glance. "Try to act professional." Darren scoffed. "Hey, I'm here, aren't I? That's already professional." Gunnar ignored them, keeping his focus ahead. His posture was stiff, his mind already running through what was about to happen. This wasn't going to be like their meetings on Earth. The High Council didn't negotiate. They dictated. They saw themselves as the keepers of balance, and if they felt things were tipping too far in one direction, they would act accordingly, which meant they had leverage. Gunnar hated that. As they reached the towering double doors of the council chamber, Aeliana paused. She turned to face them, her gaze meeting Gunnar's first, then sweeping over the rest of the team. "They will ask difficult questions," she warned. "They will press you for weaknesses. Be direct, but do not show hesitation. They respect confidence, not uncertainty." Sophia gave a curt nod. "I've dealt with bureaucrats before, this isn't new." Regin exhaled sharply, adjusting her uniform. "They're not bureaucrats," Aeliana corrected. "They are the ones who decide whether Alfheim fights beside us or leaves us to fight alone." Silence. The weight of her words settled over them. Gunnar's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. "Then let's get this over with." With that, Aeliana turned, pressing her palm against the rune-carved doors. A pulse of ancient magic surged outward, and the doors groaned open, revealing the High Council waiting within. The air in the High Council chamber was thick with tension, the weight of ancient authority pressing down on the visitors from Earth. Gunnar, Sophia, Regin, Eli, Darren, Clora, and Alatheris stood before the assembled council, their expressions schooled, but the reality was clear. This was not their domain. The council's chamber was a grand, circular hall carved from pristine white stone, lined with intricate glowing runes that pulsed with Alfheim's very essence. At the far end, the council elders sat elevated, their expressions unreadable. Their robes shimmered with arcane energy, and their piercing gazes settled on the delegation from Earth like hawks assessing prey. Eliana stood at the head of the Earth delegation, poised, every movement carefully measured. She alone understood just how delicate this situation was. Sophia, ever the commander, stepped forward first. She had the bearing of a woman who had led countless men and women into battle, who had survived political bloodbaths just as vicious as the ones fought on the battlefield. She offered the traditional Alfheim greeting, placing a fist over her heart and bowing her head slightly. "We come in peace," Sophia began, her voice steady, diplomatic. "I am Sophia Mercer, Director of Homeland Security's Paranormal Division. With me is Colonel Regin Vaughan, the new commanding officer of Echo Division. We are here to—" A sharp sound, almost like a sigh, cut through the chamber. "The humans bring yet another commander." The words came from Elder Valen, his tone laced with thinly veiled condescension. The elder's silver eyes flickered with mild amusement, but there was no warmth in his expression. "The last leader of your Echo Division came to us under unfortunate circumstances." His gaze landed pointedly on Gunnar. "And now you stand before us, again asking for aid." Sophia's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. "Echo Division has undergone changes, but—" "That is evident, Director Mercer." This time, it was Elder Lyrian, her sharp voice laced with exasperation. Her violet robes shimmered with imbued power, and the way she looked at Sophia and Regin was the way a mother might look at two children who had wandered somewhere they didn't belong. "We granted Alfheim's aid because one of our own fell in battle, defending your world. That was not an agreement to pledge ourselves to your war," Lyrian continued. "And yet," Elder Valen added, his voice smooth as silk, "you return." Regin stepped forward now, straight-backed and formal, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "I am Colonel Vaughan," she said. "I speak for Echo Division, and respectfully we are not here to demand your aid. We are here to strengthen our alliance." Silence. Then soft chuckling. It wasn't humour. It was mockery. "Strengthen an alliance?" Elder Lyrian arched a brow. "With a division that no longer exists in the same capacity?" Regin faltered, not expecting the challenge so soon. "We are—" "A military faction in disarray." Elder Valen's voice cut through, slicing through whatever authority Regin had been trying to wield. "You lost your independence. You have been absorbed by your government's machine. And now you come here, asking us to place our trust in that." Sophia took a careful step forward, her voice measured. "We did what was necessary to ensure the survival of our people." "The survival of your people does not dictate the will of Alfheim," another elder cut in, their voice curt and final. Regin stiffened, her composure slipping ever so slightly. She had expected diplomacy. She had not expected this. Sophia too was starting to see the problem. This wasn't a simple meeting. This was an interrogation. A crucifixion. The High Council had already sized them up and found them lacking. Gunnar, up until now, had been standing with his arms crossed, watching Sophia and Regin flounder. He had been here before. He had dealt with Alfheim's bureaucratic nightmares, the weight of their judgment. And he was not surprised that they had just thrown Sophia and Regin to the wolves. But now it was starting to piss him off. Because while the council debated politics, their people were still dying. And he had enough of it. Eliana must have sensed it because she glanced at him sharply as if silently warning him not yet. But Gunnar was done playing nice. He took a step forward, drawing all eyes to him. All right, we're done with the posturing. The words dropped like a thunderclap in the room. The elders stilled. Sophia and Regin turned slightly, eyes flickering toward him. Even Eliana's lips parted slightly, as if bracing for impact. Gunnar's blue eye burned cold as he surveyed the council. We're not here to beg. We're not here to play word games. We're here because the war you're all so damn hesitant to join is already at your doorstep. Lyrian's expression turned icy. You presume much? I don't presume. I know. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, rippling across the chamber like the echo of distant thunder. Your warriors have already bled for this fight. His gaze swept over them. And I buried one of them myself. Silence. The weight of that statement crashed down like a hammer. Eliana's eyes flickered, something raw in her expression. Gunnar took another slow step forward. You're trying to pretend this isn't your fight. But it is. Because the same people coming for us, they'll come for you too. Elder Valen studied him carefully. You speak as though Alfheim cannot defend itself. Gunnar let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. Oh, you can defend yourselves. That's not the point. His gaze locked onto Valan's. The point is, you shouldn't have to fight this alone, and neither should we. Lyrian exhaled through her nose, but something in her expression had changed. They were listening now. Gunnar turned slightly, nodding toward Eliana. You wanted a reason to help? She already made that choice for you when she risked everything to stop the Demon King. And you know what? He met their gazes, unapologetic. She was right. A heavy silence settled, and this time, none of the council argued. This was only the beginning. The war of words wasn't over yet, but Gunnar had just forced their hand, and he wasn't backing down. The silence in the chamber was deafening. The weight of Gunnar's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, crackling with unspoken tension. Elder Lyrian's gaze was sharp, her silver brows furrowing ever so slightly. Elder Valan's fingers tapped against the polished armrest of his ornate chair, a subtle tell, but Gunnar saw it. They weren't ignoring him anymore, but that wasn't enough. Not yet. Gunnar inhaled slowly, his stance solid, his single blue eye flicking across the council. He didn't just want them listening. He wanted them to feel it. You think this is still politics? He said, his voice low, steady, the kind of tone that preceded a storm. You think this is about convenience? Let me tell you what this war has already cost us. He took one step forward, his cybernetic fist clenching at his side. Shade. He met Lyrian's gaze. Shot in the leg by one of their new weapons. His nervous system shut down in seconds. Another step. Lyra. Missing. We don't know if she's alive or dead. His voice hardened. That's not an assumption. That's our reality. His fists tightened, the metal joints of his cybernetic arm groaning under the pressure. Erendil. The name alone made the room feel colder. Gunnar didn't glance at Eliana, but he felt her shift slightly beside him. One of yours. A warrior who fought at our side, who died because we weren't prepared for the kind of war coming for all of us. The chamber was stone silent. Even the elders who had scoffed at Sophia and Regin earlier looked unsettled. Gunnar turned, nodding to Eli. She stepped forward, her violet eyes burning with an intensity that rivaled the glow of the magical runes lining the chamber walls. Without a word, she lifted her hand, and a glowing projection flickered to life above her palm. The image spun slowly in the air, a Black Dawn energy rifle, its design sleek, brutal, and utterly foreign to Alfheim's weaponry. Elder Valen's brow twitched slightly, but he said nothing. This, Eli began, her voice strong and unwavering, is what nearly crippled Shade. It doesn't use conventional ammunition. It fires a concentrated energy blast, one that disrupts the nervous system on impact. The rifle projection expanded, breaking apart into its individual components. A glowing blue crystal pulsed at its core. Eli's voice hardened. A crystal we have confirmed to be void stone. A murmur rippled through the council. That got their attention. Elder Lyrian narrowed her eyes, leaning forward slightly. Void stone? Eli flicked her fingers and the rifle projection vanished, only to be replaced by another image. This time, it was the dead super trooper. His massive frame loomed in the projection, veins blackened with something unnatural, his eyes empty and lifeless. We recovered this body, Eli continued, her tone sharper now. You may not recognize it, but I can tell you exactly what it is. She turned slightly, nodding to Alatharis, who stepped beside her, his face grim. Eli didn't pause. This soldier was enhanced, not by training, not by magic, by something else, something engineered. She turned, facing the council fully. This body is full of an alchemical compound derived from voidstone. A ripple of shock moved through the chamber. Alatharis spoke now, his deep, even voice carrying across the hall. We studied the substance. It's unlike anything seen before. A combination of forced mutations, magical reinforcement, and physical augmentation. And the worst part? His golden eyes flicked toward Lyrian. This one was just a prototype. Elder Valen's fingers stilled. The gravity of the revelation settled over the council like a suffocating fog. This is not a hypothetical threat, Eli pressed. This is happening, right now, and if we don't stop it, we will be facing an army of these. Gunnar took another step forward. This isn't just Earth's war, he said, voice low, lethal. This is your war. You either fight it now, on our terms. His single blue eye locked onto Elder Valen. Or you fight it when it reaches your gates. Silence. The elders didn't speak. They didn't have to. The weight of the truth was already crushing them. The heavy silence stretched in the chamber, thick with the weight of Gunnar and Eli's revelations. The council members looked rattled, some shifting in their seats, others gripping the arms of their chairs as if trying to anchor themselves. Then Clora stepped forward. She moved with purpose, her presence commanding. The polished plates of her ceremonial elven armor gleamed under the soft glow of the chamber's enchanted lights, her lieutenant's rank standing stark against the silver detailing. But it wasn't the armor that made them take notice. It was the fire in her eyes. Nothing had changed since the day she had fought beside their warriors in Alfheim. She had bled with them. She had earned her place among them. She was Pack, and they needed to understand that. Her voice, steady and unyielding, cut through the silence. The elven troops stationed on Earth are under my command, she said, her gaze sweeping across the assembled elders. They are here to fight, not to debate. And make no mistake, they will follow me. Not Echo Division, not your bureaucracy. Her voice hardened. They are warriors first, and I am their commander. She let that settle in. A murmur moved through the chamber. A few elders exchanged uneasy glances. Others looked ready to argue, but none spoke yet. Clora wasn't finished. I am Pack. She looked each of them in the eye, daring them to challenge her. Not Echo Division, and neither are they. The last words landed like a hammer. Aeliana stood silently at Gunnar's side, watching Clora with something close to pride in her expression. Then a new voice broke the tension. A smooth, familiar one, tinged with sarcasm. Well, Darren said, stepping forward with his usual easy confidence. Now that we've got that cleared up. He made a show of adjusting the cuffs of his army dress blues before clasping his hands behind his back in mock formality. His eyes, however, were sharp. I'd like to officially inform the council, he continued, that a human army battalion, specifically the 5077th Engineer Battalion, is currently on Earth, clearing land and constructing permanent facilities for both the pack and your elven forces. He gave an easy shrug. Because, warriors need somewhere to sleep. That got a reaction. Some of the elders' brows furrowed. Others muttered amongst themselves, their expressions unreadable. Darren grinned slightly, not missing a beat. And before you ask, yes, that means human forces and elven forces will be training, living, and working together. Because, well, his smirk turned sharp. Turns out when you're in a war, it helps to actually prepare for it. The silence that followed was different this time. Not just uneasy. It was acceptance, realization, maybe even reluctant respect. Gunnar could see it. So could Eliana. This wasn't just an update, this was power shifting. The pack was not Echo Division. The elves on Earth followed Clora, and the human military had already begun supporting them. Alfheim's council was now faced with a choice. Either they acknowledged the new reality, or they got left behind. A deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, smooth yet unwavering in resolve. I stand with the pack. Aletharis stepped forward, his artificer's robes settling around him as if he had just declared a sacred vow. The master artisan of Alfheim was not a warrior, but his presence commanded its own weight. His shimmering, silver-threaded sleeves, embroidered with symbols of craftsmanship and magic, bore the mark of someone whose skill built legacies. And he was staking his claim. The artisans of Alfheim have long upheld tradition, but tradition alone will not see us through this war. His gaze swept across the High Council, his voice calm, measured, but absolute. We have seen what our enemy is capable of. We have witnessed their weapons, their abominations, and their willingness to sacrifice anything for power. And what have we done in return? Silence. Aletharis's sharp blue eyes narrowed. We sent our warriors to Earth, he said, and we left them to fight alone. His words cut through the room like a blade. I will not allow that again. He placed a hand over the artisan's crest on his chest. I have already pledged my support to both the Pack and Echo Division. My artisans will continue to craft the weapons and enchantments needed to turn the tide. A murmur rippled through the elders, some clearly uneasy. Others, particularly the younger council members, nodded in silent agreement. Aletharis turned, his gaze falling on Gunnar and Clora. Then, on Eli. And as if summoned by that very gaze, Eli stepped forward, her violet eyes bright with purpose. Unlike Clora, she did not wear elven armor, nor did she stand in ceremonial robes of Alfheim's nobility. Instead, she wore what she had always worn, her technomancer's gear, a fusion of sleek elven craftsmanship interwoven with technology. Because that was what she was, the bridge between two worlds. I am a pack member, Eli said, her voice steady, carrying through the chamber, the first non-human member of the pack. That alone sent shockwaves through the room. A few council members stiffened, their expressions unreadable. Others leaned in, intrigued. Eli met their gazes without hesitation. I am proud of my elven heritage, she continued, but I am also proud to stand with the pack. They welcomed me as one of their own, not because of my magic, not because of my lineage, but because I earned it. Aliena, standing just behind Gunnar, remained silent, but her gaze burned with approval. Eli wasn't done. We have spent centuries keeping our realms safe, she said, her tone calm but unyielding. And yet, for all our magic, for all our strength, we have allowed others to carry the weight of the fight for us. Her eyes swept the room. The pack fights for all of us. Her final words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Aletharis stepped beside her, nodding once. We will continue to support both the pack and Echo Division with what is required of us, he said. That is my commitment. Gunnar stood silent, watching, Aeliana had told him long ago, the council did not move easily, but now they were forced to move. The lines were drawn. Alfheim's warriors followed Clora, its artisans followed Alatheris, and one of their own, Eli, stood proudly as pack. For the first time, the council wasn't dictating terms, they were being given them. The chamber was silent. Gunnar had seen this before, the hesitation, the internal debates behind the stoic faces of the High Council. They sat in their ornate seats, watching, deliberating, weighing their options like scholars instead of warriors. It was the same cycle over and over. Gunnar was done waiting. He took a step forward, his presence alone commanding the room. His single blue eye burned with an intensity that brooked no argument. He lifted his hand and pointed directly at Regin and Sophia. "I have served with both of these women," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "They are not outsiders. They are warriors, leaders. And I personally chose Regin to command Echo Division." His words landed heavily. A murmur swept through the chamber. Some of the councillors exchanged uneasy glances. Others, particularly the younger, more progressive members, nodded in recognition. "I will work with them," Gunnar continued, his voice steady, unshakable. "Just as I work with Alfheim. Just as I have always worked with those willing to stand and fight." His gaze swept the chamber, landing on each individual council member. "You speak of balance," he said. "You hold your traditions, your neutrality, your high ideals. But balance means action. It means being part of the fight, not just watching from the side." He let the words settle. Then he dropped the hammer. "I have a place for you." He let his words carry, deep and final. A place for Alfheim to construct an embassy on Earth. The weight of that statement rippled through the room. Gasps, stiff postures, widened eyes. The council had preached balance for centuries. Gunnar was giving them a way to prove it. He took a step back. "You wanted a reason to act?" His voice was low, measured, deadly serious. "This is it." No more arguments, no more negotiations. It was a challenge, a demand. And then, without waiting for a response, Gunnar turned on his heel. One by one, his people followed. Clora, her ceremonial armour gleaming, head held high. Eli, her violet eyes sharp, her purpose unshaken. Darren, adjusting his army dress blues, murmuring, "Damn, that was dramatic." Alatheris, silent but proud, walking beside them. Aeliana nodding once to the council before stepping away. They left, each step echoing through the chamber. Sophia and Regin lingered, glancing at one another. The council sat, unmoving. Finally, slowly, Sophia turned and followed the others. Regin stood a moment longer, her eyes flicking across the gathered elves. Then she let out a breath and strode after them, leaving the High Council to decide their own damn fate.